What's up guys, welcome back to the channel. Today I want to talk about a topic that's been pissing me off for years, and it's really something that comes up every couple of months, every couple of years. It's a recurring theme, and it's this idea that you can somehow replicate or replace cardio with other activities, and in some narrow cases that's true, but usually when those ideas are presented it lacks really the nuance. And that's why I want to make this video today, to really educate people on this topic, because it's something that I feel a lot of people don't really understand at all. And there's this guy called Judd Lienhard, and he's pretty big on Instagram, has almost 1 million followers. Obviously big, strong guy, obviously enhanced, and I've seen him over the Reels page. A lot of the things he does are very impressive. He's obviously strong, but I got sent 2 of his posts by a friend this week, and I just have to kind of take this as an opportunity to, like I said, clear up some misconceptions, because I feel it's really doing people a disservice. So let's look at the first post right away. And here he's basically arguing that sprinters or sprinting is a better way to train your heart than endurance training. Let's read what he's actually got to say. Sprinters have healthier hearts than elite endurance athletes. Here's why. It's not just the sprinting itself that makes them healthy. It's what happens before the sprinting and in between sprints. Most sprint training is actually something called moderate intensity interval training. The sprinters will often be on the track for well over 2 hours, and the vast majority of the time is spent prepping their tissues and working on technique with low to moderate intensity drills. So just right off the gate, the first sentence, sprinters have healthier hearts than elite endurance athletes. That claim isn't substantiated by anything, like literally nothing. First off, how do you define healthy, right? So the only thing we can really measure is the VO2 max, and VO2 max basically is the maximum amount of oxygen your body can utilize during intense exercise. And we can take it as a proxy for heart health, because VO2 max is also one of the most robust indicators of longevity in humans. So in general, we can say a higher VO2 max is better and indicates a healthier heart. There's some nuance, maybe I will get into that a little bit later. Now, who actually has the highest VO2 max on the planet? It's endurance athletes, okay? It's cross-country skiers, it's runners, it's cyclists, it's rowers, and elite endurance athletes, males, have usually a VO2 max in the 70s, okay? And when we look at sprinters don't have exceptional VO2 maxes, so it's usually in the 50 to 55-ish range, which is not very high for an elite athlete in their 20s. Okay, so we can say sprinting in and of itself doesn't build an exceptional or elite VO2 max. Now, that being said, he doesn't actually provide any arguments why the sprinters have healthier hearts. It's just something he claims without anything to back it up. But then he makes some claims about how sprinting actually builds the heart. And basically his claim is, you're not just sprinting for 10 seconds, but you get to the track and you move around and you warm up, and between sets you actually do some mobility drills. So it's basically low level activity, okay? And that's basically also what he writes in the caption. Sprint training is not what you think it is. I've long said that speed drills are some of the best zone 2 training you can do. During the speed drills, your heart rate and blood velocity results in the maximal filling of the left ventricle. The only drawback is it doesn't train slow twitch mitochondria very well or improve muscular endurance. But for heart health, it's great. So in terms of stroke volume or cardiac output, so the amount of blood your heart can pump with each heartbeat, the main driver of adaptation, yes, is volume. So the more time you spend training, the more big juicy heartbeats you get, and the more your heart stretches, and over a long enough time frame, the bigger your left ventricle gets and the higher your cardiac output gets. So in that case, or in that sense, yes, it is true that a longer sprint session where you keep moving is going to contribute to a higher VO2 max. This is true, but it doesn't mean that it's necessarily in any way superior for the heart itself compared to, for example, a 1 or 2 hour bike ride. Okay, that there's absolutely nothing to substantiate that. So at best, it's equivalent. And at worst, it's actually worse because the intensity is not continual, because you're getting like, even when you're sprinting, you're training the ATP-CP energy system. So you actually want long rest to completely restore your ATP between sets. And during that time, even if you keep moving around, your heart rate is going to drop down and you're not going to be in an effective training zone. Now, and this is what he says, it's like moderate intensity interval training. Like, I would argue it's low intensity interval training, okay? Because if you do a 5 or 10 second sprint, that's not going to be any substantial benefit to your cardiovascular strength. And then if you rest like a sprinter would 5 or 10 minutes between sets, your heart rate is going to go, like I said, out of the effective training zone. So yes, it's going to contribute something because all activity does, but it's in any way superior. Okay, next he goes on to say the heart doesn't know what they are doing, it only knows the demands required from it. The workload brings the heart rate up just below the lactate threshold, and the rest periods allow it to return to the bottom end of what is considered zone 2. So like I said, you're not going to go to the bottom end of zone 2 if you do a 5-minute rest between sprints. After a 5 or 10 second sprint, if you're actually well trained, your heart rate is going to get to zone 0 basically immediately within 1 or 2 minutes. If you are in such a high heart rate zone during a typical sprint session, it just means you're out of shape and you need more cardio. Okay. This demand is perfect for training stroke volume, mitochondrial efficiency, and capillary density. No, it's not. Okay, that's basically what I explained. You need to build a stroke volume, you need a lot of full juicy heartbeats. And yes, all training volume in some way contributes to that, but the most efficient way to do it is just to do a lot of volume of zone 1 and zone 2 training. And let's not forget that endurance athletes also do sprint interval training. Okay, they also do short reps. They may not go as fast, they may call it strides or whatever, but they also do that type of training. So it's not exclusive to sprinters. Now, in terms of mitochondria, it's not going to do much at all, because for mitochondria there are two things we can look at. You can look at the development of new mitochondria, so we call it mitochondrial biogenesis, and for that the training volume is really the main driver. So you really need to just do a lot of muscle contractions, and that's one of the reasons, like 2 reasons basically why the elite endurance athletes have the highest VO2 maxes, is because their hearts are the biggest, because they stretch them the most by doing the most amount of training volume. Those are called central adaptations, because the heart, right, central. And then you have like peripheral adaptations. That means how much can you actually utilize of the oxygen-rich blood that gets to the working muscles, and here the mitochondria are really the key element, and you build new mitochondria again by training volume muscle contraction. Okay, so basically same argument and same reason why sprinting is not superior for that. And then there's another element to mitochondria, and that's mitochondrial respiration, and that's basically how good your mitochondria are at utilizing that energy, and that gets trained by high intensity training mainly. So we were talking about high intensity interval training here, not short sprints. That would be like VO2 max training in the classic sense, like for example 2, 3, 4 minute intervals where the heart rate gets sky high and stays up there. Okay, and then basically he goes on about the same stuff we already debunked here, and that's and then just a bunch of babble. So basically it's just a bunch of pseudoscience. The final verdict is yes, sprint interval training or sprint training in general can contribute to VO2 max, because VO2 max is multifactorial and it can contribute in a number of ways, but it's not superior in any way, and nothing suggests that sprinters have healthier hearts than endurance athletes. So for sure as hell they don't have stronger hearts because their fucking VO2 max is lower. So that's just a complete bullshit claim. And that's not to say that sprinting is bad. Sprinting is great for like building your fast twitch muscle fibers. You're maintaining your fast twitch motor units, just building muscle strength. Sprinting may actually be the best specific strength training for endurance athletes, but it's not really effective, nor is it directed towards building a stronger heart. And the other bullshit post, let me just find it real quick. Yeah, it's a similar argument. It's again the cardio cell logic. Oh, I don't need to do cardio because I can just do something else. And here we have John Grimek, legendary, I don't know, silver era, bronze era, not too versed in bodybuilding history, bodybuilder. John Grimek, he popularized breathing squats. Let's read what the guy has to say. Hate cardio but want to get in shape, try breathing squats. These have gotten their reputation as being a brutal way to create quad growth, almost like a gut check, but they serve a much deeper purpose. They are a great way to get in shape fast. They are a form of high resistance speed interval training, and they can be used not only to initiate quad growth, but also to build the stroke volume of the heart and the mitochondria of fast twitch fibers. Here's how to do them. I would recommend doing them after either a leg day or a low intensity cardio day, so you start with a relatively high heart rate. Pick a light weight, ideally 40% of your 1RM or less for this purpose. My max squat is over 600 pounds and I like to use 185 for example. Do 20 reps. Each rep is slow, deep and separated by 3 deep diaphragmatic breaths. Each rep should take about 3 seconds with about a 10-second break in between. Each set will take over 4 minutes. Most of the set should be beneath your lactate threshold. Blah blah blah. Blah blah blah. Do 2 sets, stay active in between, up and walking. Okay, so basically the claim is, he makes the claim that you can build your stroke volume. Remember, it's like the stretching of the heart to make the heart bigger to pump more blood, and the mitochondria with basically squats. And so breathing squats are nothing new and they have been around forever. I first read about them 20 years ago probably, and I'm not too familiar with bronze and silver area bodybuilding, so I'm not sure what John Grimek exactly was prescribing, but the basic prescription was always this. You take a weight you can do 10 reps with and then you just go and do 20. And of course you only can do that by taking breaths and rest between the reps, and thus you're turning the set into a cluster set. Obviously this requires a decently heavy weight, so you're actually going to get a pretty good strength and hypertrophy stimulus from it, and it's going to be pretty demanding. Now this does work. It's proven recommendations, especially for lower body hypertrophy and strength, and I've done stuff like that in the past. Now this original prescription, a lot of lifters seem to think that's going to count as cardio, and the answer is unfortunately not really. And why is that? So the way your cardiovascular system works is that the left ventricle of the heart contracts and pumps blood throughout the body, and then the oxygen gets extracted by the target muscles, but as the target muscles during activity contract and relax, they act as additional pumps, facilitating venous return, venous blood returning towards the heart, and that preloads the heart and basically pumps the blood back into the heart and increases stroke volume for sending it back out again. Now, if you do strength exercises, especially when you're using the Valsalva maneuver, which means you're bracing and holding your breath, and there are prolonged muscle contractions, that means that venous return gets inhibited, and thus less blood is returning to the heart. So the stroke volume doesn't actually increase, but because there's not enough blood around, the heart has to contract faster to pump more blood again. And that means during, for example, heavy squats, the heart rate can rise a lot, even though the stroke volume isn't that high, and that means actually we don't get a lot of stretching of the heart. And that's with classic breathing squats, the way I've seen them originally prescribed. Now what Judd Lienhard is prescribing here is a little bit different. He's using a pretty light weight and he's doing a slow pace. And yes, that's going to allow for a little bit more relaxation between reps, but also the pace is very slow. So I would say the exercise itself is not very cyclical. You're basically just standing around there for most of the time. So his prescription, 40% of 1 RM. As some of you know, I'm a kettlebell sport athlete and coach, and we actually use high repetition squats a lot in our general physical preparation. And the way we do it, we usually prescribe up to 100 reps at a high pace of 20 reps per minute. So I've personally done 60 kilograms for 100 reps in under 5 minutes. And a kettlebell sport athlete of Lienhard size would do the weight he's doing for 20 reps at 5 RPM. He would do that weight for 100 reps at 20 RPM. So if he was a kettlebell sport athlete of that size, he would do 185 for 100 reps in under 5 minutes. Because we are using higher reps and higher pace, I would say that would be a superior exercise for basically everything. Now what he's prescribing here, in my opinion, isn't going to do much at all, because on one hand the weight is too light to get the strength and hypertrophy benefits you would get from the original breathing squats that aren't good for actual cardiovascular training, because again the tension is too high. The Valsalva maneuver inhibits the venous return and you're going to get a high heart rate, yes, but you're not going to get actual adaptations. Now what he's prescribing, the slow pace and the relatively low reps make it just an exercise in standing around. So you're just standing around supporting a light weight, and if that actually gets you out of breath, it just means again you need to work on your cardio, because it is shit. And is this going to actually stretch your heart and give you a bigger stroke volume? I would assume at best, and that's like the best case scenario, you're going to get the same amount of stroke volume you're going to get during zone 2 cardio. But it's only 2 sets of 4 minutes, so you could just do 10 minutes on the elliptical while nose breathing and get the same effect in terms of heart stretching. So it's really not worth the hassle for anything. So yeah, that's the 2 protocols I've seen him prescribe, the sprints and the squats, and in both cases his claims are, in my opinion, complete bogus, and I actually presented my logic and my arguments on why I believe that to be the case. Now, what can we learn from that? I believe if you want to actually learn how something works, you should actually trust people who have done that particular thing you care about. So if you actually want to build a high VO2 max, look at the people who have a high VO2 max. And who has a high VO2 max? It's endurance athletes, and it's not TRT Instagram influencers. Now, if you want to learn something about strength, probably you can find some good ideas on his Instagram, but I would be surprised if his VO2 max was actually much over 40 or 45. So keep in mind that just because a guy may look big and impressive, On Instagram, it doesn't mean that everything he says is true, and that's something we call the halo effect. So we see a person who's good at one thing and we just assume they know what they're talking about in general, but often that's not the case. So high repetition squats, if you actually do high repetitions at a high pace, yes, it can decently contribute to endurance, but not a lightweight for 20 reps at 5 RPM, and overall you're just going to be better off with cyclical traditional cardio. You might ask me, but what about kettlebell sport? Kettlebell sport is very different because we have a much higher pace and it's much more cyclical because we have a lot of phases of tension and relaxation, so the venous return isn't really inhibited. It's really similar to, for example, the rowing or the ski erg. So if you do, for example, long cycle for 8 reps per minute, that's actually 2 movements per repetition. So you're actually moving 16 times per minute, and each movement is going to have 2 or 3 cycles of contraction and relaxation in the working muscles. And the other thing is, we're not actually holding our breath ever in kettlebell sport, even when we're working with double 32s. So there's no Valsalva maneuver, nothing is inhibited, not the blood circulation, not the breathing, and we're just moving the same way we would basically as if we were running. Now, in terms of the sprints, pure sprint training isn't going to have much of a cardiovascular benefit, as the evidence shows when we just look at the VO2 max of elite sprinters. Are those things still beneficial? Yes, I do sprints, I do plyos myself. I also do high reps, albeit a little bit differently. My protocols are a little bit more demanding, but that's neither here nor there. If you want to actually train your heart, you have to do cardio. Okay, you have to do cyclical activity, and the main factor is going to be the volume. Alright guys, hope that helps expand your understanding of cardiovascular training. Don't believe everything you see on the internet, and see you guys next time.